Okay, greetings and welcome everybody. Welcome to the panel discussion after the film African Apocalypse. So my name is Charmaine Simpson. I'm one of the directors of Black History Studies, and Black History Studies is an organization that teaches Black history and Black studies throughout the UK and abroad by any means necessary. And we do that throughout the whole year and not just during Black History Month. And I've been asked to host this after or post-screening discussion tonight. Before I start, I'd just like to say thank you for taking part and watching the virtual screening. If you're on the social media, please tell your friends and family to come and watch the remaining screenings. I also would like to say welcome and thanks to the support of the Bertha Foundation, the BFI Doc Society, and the BBC Arena for bringing this film to us. And I hope you agree that this film has been a very eye-opening and a very emotional watch to see and learn about the hidden history of this period of time that has been brought to us by this film. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce my panel made up of some amazing people today. You're in for a treat, okay? So first I'm going to introduce Eunice. I'll ask her to introduce herself, and then we're going to introduce everybody and we'll have a discussion. Eunice? Like to unmute yourself? Yeah.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for having me today. I just think that, so first of all, my area, my background is fashion, arts, and I also work in broadcasting. I think that this is such a fantastic and unique opportunity for us to engage in some really robust and thorough discourse around this topic. So thank you so much for having me here this evening, and I'm really excited to proceed.
Excellent. Then we've got another amazing person that doesn't even need an introduction. He's been on this path for a very long time. Let's introduce Lee Jasper.
Hi, Lee Jasper, former Deputy Mayor of London, and host of the Lee Jasper Drive Time programme, hence the background on YouTube. I'm a Black Sox member. Black Sox, BLAKSOX, is a unique Black social movement made up of Black professionals and activists. I'm the former chair of the Mangrove Community Association for 15 years and founder of Operation Black Vote, the Black Voter Registration Drive a charity, and I'm delighted to be on this panel.
Excellent, excellent. And then we've got Femi Nalanda. Greetings, brother. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Even better now you're here. Excellent.
Sorry, I had some technical issues. I am. Yeah, I'm happy you've all seen the film. I'm happy we're going to have a very, very interesting discussion. We've been having them all week, and it's really, really great to see the film kind of sparking off these conversations and hopefully maybe sparking up some action. So I'm really interested to hear what everyone has to say.
Oh yes, definitely, definitely. So thank you everybody for introducing themselves. So everybody's actually watched the film. I've taken different information out the film because I'm an educator. I go out into the community teaching Black history and Black studies, and I'm actually putting together a course looking at Black European history, and this will definitely feature because before this actual film and me being aware of this film, I didn't know about these atrocities that were happening in France and what was happening in Niger. And I was like, oh my gosh, how come I didn't know about this? Because I know all about King Leopold and his atrocities because we do a lot of research. We actually got a Black History of Brussels tour that was hoping to do in April of this year, but that had to be moved because of Rona. So I'm aware of what the atrocities that King Leopold did, but I didn't come across the atrocities and the genocide that was happening in Nigeria. And I was like, why is that? And as an educator, this is important to me to highlight and share this information. So when Priscilla came and brought this film to me and I watched the film, I was like, oh yes, I have to bring it to our audience because these are the stories I want to share and talk about some of these things that have a long-term legacy and a lingering legacy, especially with us Black Africans living in the diaspora. We're looking at what's the legacy of colonialism, racism, all of that we're seeing at this moment in time. And these are the stories that we need to share. So it's very important that this film was brought to the forefront, and that's why I have to big thanks to Femi and Rob for providing this film, because this film is much needed, and this is the history that needs to be uncovered and shared, and we have a good conversation about what we've learned in that film. So that was some of the things that I got from this film. Lee, want to share any thoughts or comments about the film? What did you take from the film?
Well, I thought it was an excellent film, first of all. I think it makes a great contribution to the canon of knowledge of Africans in the diaspora about the complexities and of European colonialism on the continent. I think there's about 6 spin-off documentaries to come off that one effort, Femi. So congratulations. I think you sparked so much debate in so many different areas that there's a lifetime's work in that documentary of unpacking its various thematics. And I think that the realities of current day colonialism, neo-colonialism on the continent that is referenced in the documentary, gives a really powerful insight into the continued rape of African economic resources and the colonial relationship of the French Anglophile countries with the French government. Again, another vivid illustration of the kind of neo-colonialism economic order that is seeing Africa subject again, this time led by China, to a new economic exploitation. I thought that were in some interesting parts. I was surprised not to see Frantz Fanon mentioned at all within the documentary, particularly in relation to the deep psychopathology of colonialism, and particularly French colonialism, which is particularly insidious in its demand that people speak French and are French citizens, and the cultural annihilation of African culture in favour of the French xenophobic variety, that, though it be clothed in revolutionary garms, looks incredibly like every other form of colonialism on the planet. I thought Frantz Fanon could have had a mention, could have had a reference in there, but like I say, it's not criticism in that sense, because there's so many other documentaries that could bounce off this one. I knew of Paul Volley because simply because I was taught by Professor Jill John, who's the wife of Professor Gus John, and she did anti-colonial studies in Manchester, and she was very meticulous in providing us with deep insight. But what I did think in looking at this, and I think Charmaine is right on the broader point, is that there are so many, from Angola to Mozambique to Rhodesia, there are so many deeply horrific stories about Africa's colonial exploitation that have yet to be fully explored, that I think you, once again, Femi, created a whole new genre of documentaries that will, together provide that illustration. So enjoyed it. I think you could have had more African agency. I'm a very, I think more references to African resistance and those who, fought back could be in the movie. I didn't like the opening text with with the reference from Conrad. I maybe thought a resistance text should have been prior to, but these are matters of subjective opinion, and I'm not a movie critic or anything like that. I'm just an activist. So this is my contribution to the debate, as it were. But overall, I thought it was a great historical contribution and a contemporary contribution to understanding the issues of French colonization in the Niger.
Yeah, excellent. I don't know, is Uni still there?
Yeah, I am indeed.
Okay, your camera was off. I just wanted to get your opinions on your film. What some of the takeaways you got from the film?
One sec, I'm just having a little small issue here. Okay, great. I think for me, one of the most I suppose, compelling aspects of the film for me, and what I probably enjoyed the most, as someone who works as a broadcaster. My background isn't academics or, I suppose, philosophy, although I do some filmmaking. But I think one of the most interesting things, particularly for those who are consuming it, for the audience, this is a question that comes up time and time again, particularly within the United Kingdom. And it's often said to me, well, why does this matter? Why are we going back in time and revisiting trauma that happened in the past? And often what I try to explain to people here in the United Kingdom is, which I do think is quite unique, because when I'm discussing this topic with people in the United States of America and other parts of the Western world where we see the African diaspora being present, I do feel that here in the UK that there is what I like to call a collective amnesia, which is very deliberate. And I always try to explain that within our culture in the West, whether it's France, Germany, Portugal, or the UK, that there's one thing that is extremely important to the people, and that is inheritance. And I think that for me, this kind of argument that it doesn't matter because it happened in the past, and why are we so interested in something that happened so long ago, this documentary is perfect in highlighting and articulating the reality and exposing the way that what happened in the past is so relevant and is so meaningful and is a direct shaper and catalyst as to where we are now as African people. And I think that's what I most loved about the film. I think it negotiated the topic well. And I think that when people that I meet, they really haven't seen a lot of films like this. I mean, I'm aware from some of my studies in media, there's probably only about, say, 5 or 6 feature films that were ever, blockbuster feature films that were ever made about the transatlantic slave trade, which is quite shocking when you think about the legacy and the impact that this specific period in human society had on the world. And I do think it's really important to kind of join up those dots so that people now understand that although they may not have been alive at the time that these acts were perpetrated, if we truly believe in ourselves as humane, as loving, as kind, if we want to say that we're civilized, that we're democratic, then surely the descendants of those who have directly benefited, they've benefited both in terms of inheritance and in terms of legacy, economically, socially, and politically, then there is a moral and social responsibility.
Excellent. Thank you, Eunice. And Femi, able to join us? Welcome.
I'm here, indeed.
Yeah, so let's see. Yeah. Comment. You want to come back on anything that we've said today about the film?
Yeah, I agree with Lee to that one of the self-criticisms we've made on the film is that we could have had more of a nod to the very, very, very strong resistance that was shown against the French in the film. Because there was a lot of resistance, and really the only reason the Europeans won was not because the Africans were superior, but just because the Africans were inferior, but just because the European guns were superior. They just had military technology that allowed them to kind of decimate people. And it's the same across the colonial world, from Undermen, where the machine gun was used. I mean, Cecil Rhodes, I think, was one of the first people to use the machine gun in the Underbelly Wars. The Maxim gun and the rest. So I agree on that point, and I think that's a fair criticism. I'm glad you all have enjoyed the film, and that is added to kind of the canon of the kind of anti-colonial movement, and I'm just hopeful that we can spark a lot more conversations from it, and that we can look at a lot more of these stories, because even though it's a kind of dramatization and Paul Voulet looks like the bad guy, Paul Voulet is just a symptom of what was a wider colonial project, that not just a French project, but an English project, a Portuguese project, a Spanish project, a Dutch project, a European project, really.
Yeah. And for me as an educator, I absolutely love the film because it will give people an introduction to this whole area if they didn't know about it before. And it hopefully will encourage people to go and do their own independent research as well. And exactly what Uni said about why we're going back into the past. Our past is very important. Yeah, our past is very important. Our past, this legacy continues to this day. And as you saw in the film, how people are still suffering from the effects of that, from the effects of the crimes of Voulet and others. Still, you have people suffering from illnesses that were caused by them being forced or to go and mine uranium. All of these things still have relevance to this day. So our past is very, very important. And even though it was happening in the past, it's still relevant to us now. And this continues on and on and on. And Eunice mentioned in terms of enslavement, yeah, we must talk about this because people are still benefiting from that system to this day. Even if they weren't alive during that time, they're still benefiting from it. So it's very important that we show these films as well and have these conversations as well. And as at the moment, a lot of people have been talking about the teaching of Black history in schools and highlighting this whole area of history. We can be highlighting this as well, but doing it in the context of that this happened back then, it's still affecting us now. And what are the legacies of colonialism in Africa to this day? Yeah. And yeah, we must have those conversations. And I'm glad that this film was made so we can actually use this as a starting point and hope to see many, many more presentations as well. Yeah. So Femi, what would you like to see happen with this film? What would you personally like to see what would happen?
In terms of concrete actions, one thing that could happen is there could be a real case brought towards France, as has been done in terms of the Algerian situation, for some kind of reparatory justice, and acknowledgement of the crimes. But again, in terms of just the wider knowledge of and ability of us to be able to defend and say, no, this really was a Holocaust of sorts. This really was a crime against humanity, colonialism, right? Kind of being able to kind of beat back the Niall Fergusons of the world, and say, no, empire was a horrific thing. And here is the first person testimony from the people who are direct descendants of the victims, and I think that is what I'm very happy about, that the film is very real and talks to the people of Niger and gets their story. And I would like more and more people to know this story, and for more and more people to become interested and critical in colonial history and how it really has shaped the modern world that we live in, shaped the inequality we see in the world today, shaped the economical systems by which we live today, and maybe then also get involved in overturning them as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. If I may add, I thought the scene with the Muslim young women in Connie, Verini Connie, was powerful when they began to talk about, the slaughter of their grandparents. And, there's this notion, isn't there, that Eunice raised, that, it's all in the past, what does it matter? Well, if a trauma is inflicted on a young child at the age of 4, a serious trauma, and he has a breakdown at the age of 40, it's to be understood that the trauma suffered in his early life has given rise to an adult crisis. And it's the same with true peoples. You've seen peoples. I remember when the former Yugoslavia broke up as a country, as a communist country, and people thought, oh well, all of the Balkan conflicts in the area would simply just disappear after 80 years or whatever it was of communism. And in fact, they reasserted themselves such an extent that, of course, we had the Muslim genocide in Bosnia as a consequence. And so unresolved historical trauma in people's lived experience and lives, resides just underneath the surface. And any time it's not acknowledged and recognized and reparation is not paid, it is likely to be emerged. And what this documentary did is gave the people of Niger an opportunity both to revisit the trauma, but also to revisit Asia. And I thought the Muslim girls was very moving, moved to tears from an atrocity that happened over 100 years ago, but very much lived emotionally as if the moment had just passed. And I think the other thing is just to be clear, we're talking about white supremacy. Yeah, we call it colonialism, but we're talking about white supremacy, which is the fundamental ideological driver for colonialism in the past and neo-colonialism today, most notably with its ardent champion, Donald Trump. And my other point was this, is that Paul Boulay was a complete sadistic psychopath. You know, I wanted to see him at some point categorized as such in the thing, because I think it's important to say that colonialism and the people that Britain and France and others sent to Africa were these psychopathic, sadistic, you know, who had been in jail in any other country. And I think the Sultan in the film says, you know, if Volta was alive today, he'd be in the International Court of The Hague. You know, these are deeply psychotic people. And you've got to ask yourself, what is the penchant of the European psyche that so willingly allows them to subjugate people to the most horrific barbarism that we just don't see anywhere else to that scale in human history? And I also thought the nod to spiritualism in the documentary was great, because these French soldiers, as they came over there and slaughtered, were haunted by the deep banshees of the ancestors who came back and terrorized them in night terrors to the point where they almost had mental health crises themselves. So I think, you know, the education, as I say, there's so much to unpack on this movie. As you can see, you could write 15 volumes on each aspect of it. I'm absolutely sure.
Yeah. Unisha, do you want to come back and say anything?
I think, I mean, as we're talking and we're continuing to really get into this piece of work, there was a quote that came to be one of my favorite ones by Marcus Garvey, and he says, a people without the knowledge of their past history and culture is like a tree without roots. And I remember thinking about that because within the film there's so many references to trees, and there's this amazing tree that they couldn't cut down that was so magnanimous and it was so strong, and even at his grave there's this tree. And I think that one of the most interesting things about modern society is that we're constantly encouraged to ignore history when it suits prevailing attitudes, but when it doesn't suit the agenda of those countries, I suppose, that are within power, then it's kind of like a double standard. And I think that, you know, when I think about trees, I think about mountains, and, you know, I think about icebergs, and, you know, you see this small peak and you see this tree, and you see these icebergs, but in actual fact, what lies beneath could be 20 or 30 times what you can see above. And I think that one of the most important issues on this particular topic with colonialism is the lack of kind of understanding and kind of putting the two things together within the West, where in any society we continually celebrate our history, we want to know about our great grandparents. You know, we have these days regularly, whether it's VE Day or, you know, where we mark these major historical moments that have happened, whether it's wars, whether it's good things, whether it's bad things, whether it's in Hollywood movies, and it's, you know, the romanticization of Pearl Harbor. The point is that when these kind of tragedies occur, it's quite normal within Western society for these to be highlighted and encapsulated and preserved and re-spoken and re-talked. However, when it comes to what has happened in Africa, you know, previously of Abyssinia and Kush, etc., the history has been so rewritten. But it's not acceptable when it comes to Africa for us to highlight these horrific Holocausts. There's no other word for it. There's no other way to describe it. And for me, I think in the 21st century, I've been in situations in broadcasting on live television where I've simply tried to talk about suffering racism, and I've been completely attacked by not only the people that I'm presenting with, but also most of the British public who refuse to believe that racism exists, which I find quite fascinating, because even when they look at, a microcosm, which might be said to be slightly trivial, but we can see that I love bringing things back to the everyday and popular culture. But we saw recently with the Sainsbury's advert, the barrage of complete and utter mockery and racism that spewed, unfortunately, from our nation regarding an advert just because it happened to have a normal everyday Black family. So what that kind of communicates to me is the severity for us to unpack and to re-communicate the reality of history, because we know Christopher Columbus didn't discover America, but for some reason that's still kind of being taught. So it's really important for us now here in the present to take the opportunity to communicate the realities of what we have found and discovered and we know, and ensure that that is part of the dialogue and the discourse and the reality of everybody, both in the West and indeed in Africa. Because we do have an issue whereby, as a consequence of colonialism and of the discourses and ideologies that have been perpetuated through particularly media, through film and television being used as ideological state apparatus to program, shall we say, the minds and the views of people, not just here in the West, but throughout the entire world. So we do have an issue whereby, modern Africans may not actually have a full understanding in certain parts of the full effect of colonialism. And in many cases, they celebrate and they think of the West as being superior. So yeah, I think it's great. It causes us to have to negotiate these it feels like they're very complex issues, but they're really not complex issues. It's like these things happened, they need to be articulated alongside the courageous, amazing and incredible cultural artifacts and contributions and the realities of the ancient civilizations, be that of Timbuktu or wherever else, where Europeans used to come and learn because they were so uneducated, shall we say, and they so revered standards of academia and knowledge. And those are the things that need to really be brought to the forefront. And I do think that if we can do that, that it will give many people in the 21st century a much more thorough, robust, and complete understanding of reality.
Yeah, and thanks for that as well, because history should be taught. That's why we set up Black History Studies 14 years ago, because I was fed up of waiting for and hearing people complaining about, oh, this education system don't teach Black history. And I thought, you know what, I'm more than capable of teaching Black history. So let's set up an organization and teach Black history. And that's what we've been doing for the past 14 years, and teaching and offering and opening out to everybody to come and learn about these hidden histories. And I was happy in the film when I learned that it is taught compulsory about the Vule campaign, that is as a compulsory subject in the education system. And I thought that is so I was happy about that, because I know sometimes, depending on where you are, they kind of hide this information and don't talk about it. But it's the fact that it's being taught compulsory is amazing. And we just need to talk about history as a whole. And this is why we have to look at all of these things, because often people say to me that, oh, Black history should just be for Black people. No, Black history is the missing pages of world history, and it should be taught but to everybody. And this is one of the reasons why we set up Black History Studies, and this is why I love the film, because this is an aspect that I know for the people that I speak to on a day-to-day basis, talking about history and various different subjects. We wouldn't know about that. And we wouldn't have, growing up in this country and going through the education system, this was never taught to me at all. And if it wasn't for me going on my journey, and it was a film that sparked my interest in this area. I watched a film called, what's it? Apocalypse Africa Made in America. And it talked about the crimes of King Leopold II and Patrice Lumumba and Congo. And I was like, this area, I need to go and do my research. So this is what sparked my research into this area. So these are the things that we need to speak about and talk about these things. And it's very important that we do that. And I'm so glad you mentioned about unresolved historical trauma, because that is something that we need to address. Okay, even things like watching TV, our black brothers and sisters being killed by police brutality, that needs to be spoken about. The fact that when you raise information about racism, you get shut down. Lee, you're the king of that. You've been battling that for your whole career. So you're the most experienced one out of this whole panel that could tell about how when you raise your head over the pulpit and talk about these things that have happened to African people, how people want to shut you down and silence you. But we're not here to be silenced. And we're going to keep telling this story. And this story has to be told by any means necessary, quoting Malcolm X. So yeah, we have to start doing that as well. I'm doing it unapologetically as well. That's what I love about the film, that film is here. People need to watch it. Let's have this conversation, have this dialogue, and have that conversation as well. Yeah. So Lee, I know Lee, you got something. I know you want to come back and say something.
Well, there's so much to come back on. I could be here all night. So don't let me dominate. Bring me back in, please do. But I just wonder about Femi, because it was a journey back to his parents' homeland. Journey. I don't know if he'd been before. I don't know whether that was his first time on the continent, or what was the context of that. I'd be interested to hear how it impacted upon him. Because Africa's like a great bottle of wine, isn't it? You go, you see, you come back, and then it sort of soaks in and resonates with you long after your foot has left the soil, and the implications come back for you personally in relation to those things. So I'd be interested to hear from him how it affected him.
Yep. So I had been before to Africa a couple of times with my family, but I'd never actually kind of been. I'd been to aunties' houses and uncles' houses and the rest. I'd never kind of gone to villages and heard from people
in the bush
about yeah, exactly. I'd never even gone exactly, and never mind hearing from them about something so intense. So in many ways, it was kind of my first way of interacting with people who weren't outside my immediate family on African soil, we could say. And yeah, it was definitely a life changing experience. As you can see, I learned some Hausa on the way. I sang with them. I went to a seance. There were lots of cultural elements beyond just hearing about the actions of Relay, which obviously are kind of looked at in the film and become part of the film and part of my journey, but only to some extent, because the film isn't a film about Femi's holiday to Africa. It's a film about colonial massacres, right? But I definitely learned about the culture. I learned about, and not just the culture, but the cultures. Niger has 11 national languages. The two guides, Arena and Hassan, were of Tamashek descent, but we were in a Hausa area. So I learned a bit more. So spending time with them introduced me to the Tamashek culture as well. Some of the soldiers were Zarma, another ethnic group. And I spent a lot of time with the soldiers because they were of my age and kind of had a camaraderie there. So there was a lot that went on behind the cameras. But then in terms of the actual trip, it changed me. The actual content changed me, obviously, because you can't go on a trip like that and hear first-hand testimony of people describing their what is one of the history's great crimes and not be changed. And also, it's just the fact that alongside all of the culture and beauty, you get to Niger and hadn't been to Niger before, but I'd been to Paris before, and you can see the difference between Niger and Paris, right? You can see that these people don't have electricity, and then you hear the stories like, well, their uranium is providing electricity for France, and even some of the people we were supposed to meet and interview couldn't interview because significant others had died of preventable diseases the day before the interview. There was someone, right? So things like that really hit home when you're traveling there. So yeah, it was definitely a life-changing trip.
I can just imagine as well. And I think in the comments I saw that Bernice Gale said that the moving part for me was the massive graves that being tarmatted and used as a driveway. And I was doing some research about mass enslavement and mass graves in places like Lagos in Portugal, which is the port, which was the part where they brought in enslaved Africans into Europe, and there's a mass grave, and that is actually a little mini golf area where people can go and play crazy golf, and that was a mass grave underneath there. So you can see that all of these things has been written out of history. You go and play your crazy golf and not know that there's African people being in a mass grave buried under this site, and it's madness to learn about that. So you can see how and there's if you're looking in the American context, there's golf courses above mass graves in America as well. So a lot of this part of our history is being whitewashed, and then people are upset like, why are you so upset about it? Because that's our ancestors underneath there that you haven't given the respects to. And this is why we have to have these films, and it's very important as well. So thanks, Bernice. So what we're going to do now, we're going to open up the floor to anybody who has any questions, okay? And don't be shy, okay? This is no questions of on question. Please share any questions that you may have as well. Anybody you don't have to put on your camera. You can just either put your question in the chat box, or you can actually raise your hand and we'll come to you as well, okay? And you can just, if it's not a question, just say how the film impacted on you. Okay. Anybody wants to go first? Don't be shy, people. And while I'm waiting for some responses, we've got to say thank you to Glasgow Film Theatre for hosting this screening, this virtual screening as well. Yeah. Anybody got any questions? I did see a hand up. Was it Dr. Solomon? Your hand went up earlier. If you've got any questions, just unmute yourself. If you can't unmute yourself, Organa. Oh,
yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Hello. Thanks. Okay. Thanks very much for the film, and it's really a great work that you've done. And interesting enough, a lot of film has been coming up this year. Prior to this, I also watched the Journey to the African Colony, which is quite a great work as well. So my question is, how do we make sure that some of the African countries are actually teaching Black history? Because at the moment, few of the countries are not. And interesting enough, if you looked at when most of the colonial master left their colonies in Africa, if you research the publisher they left with them, it was one of the ex-president of a country in Europe. So you probably have a history that is left with them that is distorted. Yes. And in recent years, an interesting thing happened in Nigeria. In 1988, Nigeria Broadcasting Corporation was sold to China. I was sold to a company, a Chinese government. So you can imagine that today, not a Chinese government, a private company from China. You can imagine what kind of history that the Nigerian children watching TV, what kind of information are they getting? Yeah, I know this is a tall order. How are we making sure that we don't have the power to actually change things, but how do we make sure that people know their history in Africa? I can say that I've been watching a lot of YouTube when the Black Americans and African comes together. You find that the Africans really do not know of the Black history compared to the Black Americans. Let me stop here. Thanks.
Yeah. So thank you for Dr. Solomon for contributing. So that's one of the reasons why we set up Black History Studies, because we wanted to teach Black history and Black studies where it's not being censored, it's done from an African perspective. So we publish our own books, we try and do presentations, screenings, we actually go and visit Africa. So, and actually one of my dreams is to actually go and teach and go and reach out and provide resources to people in Africa to teach their history as well. And also to be proud of their history, because there's so much history in Africa that we don't know in the diaspora that we need to share, and also make them feel proud about their story. And that is what colonialism has taken away from people, making them think about and not loving their history. So my family's from Jamaica. So there's a whole heap of history from Jamaica that I don't know. And with me, what I'm trying to do as well is reach out to people, whether it's via social media, whether it's presentations that we do, trying to reach out to people to say, okay, come on, let's look at our history in these countries and how do we highlight that? Maybe it's us making links and cultural exchanges and sharing the information and empowering them to actually be able to tell their story. Oral history is a very important, as we saw in the film. If it wasn't for that little tape, we would have had that information being passed on about the grandmother being sharing what happened to her. So it's all about us thinking about what technologies that we have access to share. So for example, can we start recording oral stories on our mobile phones now? Because some of our mobile phones are quite as clear, highlighting these stories, recording our stories, sharing them in various different ways, writing plays, writing stories, and making our own films. Because often assume that us in the diaspora in Africa don't have access to films and equipment. Writing those stories as well. But there's so much ways we can do this. It's just for us to have that vision to do it. And what I was saying to people this year, let's not wait for somebody to be killed by the police as an impetus for us to take interest in our history. Because all of a sudden, George Floyd got killed in America, and then everybody's talking about, we need to learn about Black history. No, we don't have to be reactionary. This should come like breathing. Why we're not sharing our history throughout the year? That's why we teach Black History Studies from January down to December, not just in Black History Month. Black History Month can be a time where we highlight certain things, but we have to do it consistently all the time and not wait for others to teach our story. We are more than capable, and we do have the power to change things, because Femi made this film. This film could be a catalyst to change and educate people. I would wonder, has people in France or Paris actually watched this film, and what are their reaction to this film? And is Roulet remembered in France in the way that is remembered in Niger? That would be interesting. I don't know, Femi, if you can answer that question, but that might be us reaching out to our Black brothers and sisters in Paris who are also going through a whole heap of struggles and strife in Paris, and also sharing this film with them and having that conversation as well. So Femi, I don't know if you know if this film's been shown in Paris.
I mean, so it's not yet. I mean, I want to redub the voiceover in French, because obviously in terms of the actual, with this film, we got it together just before the film festival. We finished the film just before the film festival, and you can see that we have stuff that happened a couple of months ago, from the Rose Must Fall, from the Black Lives Matter, from George Floyd and the rest. So we snuck that in just before we actually had to finish the film, so we haven't yet had chance to do a French. I mean, a lot of the dialogue in the film is already French, and doing subtitles of the house changing the Hausa subtitles, English subtitles for the Hausa to French subtitles is not a very hard job. I will just redub. I'd have to redo the voiceover track in French, and then we're on the phone to French distributors, and we're finding out how we're going to distribute it. I do want to myself at some point go to France when coronavirus allows, and make sure that I connect with some of like the Justice for Amadou, the Justice for Theo, some of the various parallel movements to the Black Lives Matter movement and Pan-African movements there, so that I have those connections, and so that I can be having calls like this, but with impact calls and impact screenings with Black activists and communities there, rather than just people, whoever's watching Arte that night, right? But I need to make the connections to do that, because one of the problems we have as a diaspora is we're very, very, very bad at connecting ourselves between the French and English speaking diasporas. And so at some point I want to go there, meet people, and see if I can maybe meet the right person, maybe meet someone like Priscilla, but the French Priscilla, who just has all the contacts, and will just set me up with with days and days of screenings with all the relevant Black activists and academics and interesting people in France. But I need to meet them first.
No, that's fine. There might even be people on the screening today, so please get in contact as well, because we want to share this film globally as well. And even though on end of December we're officially out of Europe, that doesn't mean that we need to be out of Europe. We need to be, but I know people have been saying about Blacksit even coming to closer now. Even though we're coming out of Europe, there's no reason why we can't be disjoint from our brothers and sisters. We need to come together and actually have those conversations and make links as well. And social media has been a way of reaching out to a lot of people, because I've had a lot of people, even I did a screening yesterday and we had people from Dubai, Bermuda, Atlanta, all around the world. So the fact that we can reach out to all people, we're doing this virtually, even though this is hosted in Scotland, I'm in Tottenham, we can use these technology now. We have no excuses now. Marcus Garvey had to go and go on ships now, so we to go and reach out to all his people now. We can do it virtually now. So everybody who's watching this, if your friends and family haven't watched this film, go on the social medias, tell them to come and watch the film, share, send it via your social medias and share it until it gets out, make it go viral, make it get sent out. So no more cat programs and things like that, and sharing things. Share this and make everybody actually watch this film. And even with myself, I made sure that I shared it around my network. It'll probably be a discussion for our advanced and introduction to Black Studies groups as well, because this is a subject that needs to be spoke about. I actually did some research, and I researched about a Black woman that was that resisted Vule, which was Queen Saruna Mangru. She actually was resistant against Vule. And I was like, wow, this Black woman just said, we're not having this, Vule, we're gonna fight you to the death. And she actually resisted. And these are the stories that we haven't been shown. So she probably get added to one of my great Black women in history courses as well, and let her history and her legacy be highlighted as well. So that could have been included in the film, but I know there's a part 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6. It doesn't have to be all done in one film. We can have spin-offs as well. And this could be inspiring rap tunes and music, plays, and all kind of stuff. Because we're creative, amazing people. We can use this film as an inspiration to keep the work going as well, which is very important as well. So Gaynor, I know you had a question to ask. You want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Firstly, I want to just thank everyone for this showing this film, and thank you, Charmaine. I'm one of the followers of your Black History Studies, and I appreciate the way you elaborate and share African history. My background is actually I did history and history of ideas, so I've got a passionate interest in history, and currently I'm actually working on an exhibition that looks at African existentialism and ways of looking at identity. So Femi, I've reached out to you, but I'm sure you probably haven't seen it. But my thoughts, my questions firstly was, number one, what was your inspiration behind the film and the reasons? And why did you choose to use it as a conversation with Vule? And then the other one was to do about identity. During the film, I think you mentioned where you said as a European as well, you felt guilty. And then there was another section where they asked you how you were feeling in terms of they felt that you're not feeling as deeply hurt by it, but obviously you have your own way of expressing your the ways you're going through this journey. So that was one, a few of the questions that I had towards Femi. And then to Dr. Lee, Jasper, you touched on bringing Frantz Fanon, and he's one of the scholars that I really engage with a lot. And as I was watching this film, I was actually thinking about him as well. And scholars such as Chianta Diop, and then there's another gentleman, I'm from Zimbabwe, called Mandibamba Rukini, who I've been sort of reading. And so as I hear all of you speaking, it's exactly what I'm sort of trying to express within the cultural themes that I'm doing. So I'm going to reach out to all of you separately in other ways. And so those are I'll just leave it at that.
Cool. So in terms of answering the question about why I did it as a conversation. I wanted, firstly, it was about making the film accessible, because the film we didn't want the film to feel like a documentary. I mean, a book is written for academics, a documentary is written for people who watch documentaries, and like a film, we tried to make it a film that someone might sit down and watch for the drama of it, and then be brought into this world of colonialism and colonial history and all of the stuff that we then eventually see in the film, right? And so in that sense, finding a space between drama and documentary, talking to Paul allowed for it to be a bit more dramatic, and also for me to bring him down a peg, because I don't call him Paul Voulet, I don't call him Mr. Voulet, I don't call him Captain, I just call him Paul. I'm like, come on, Paul, why are you, like, in a very kind of taunty way, right? It's kind of almost a way of knocking him off this pedestal that he's put himself on, and being like, no, at the end of the day, you're not special, you're just this brutal psychopath rampaging through and getting his kicks off horrific things. And so it was my idea to talk to him personally because of those reasons, really, and also because in a way it was a personal journey, and we were tracking who this person was. I didn't want to personalize him. I didn't want to make him someone who was sympathetic, but I think it would be very, very hard to do that. I wanted to bring in, try and make the voiceover compelling and dramatic in that way. In terms of the point where I say I'm a son of Africa, but also a son of Europe, it's not clear in the film, but I actually am of mixed heritage. My mum's mixed race, so I'm 3/4 African and 1/4 English. So I am technically also a son of Europe, but also that's not necessarily the point I was making. The point I was making is, I mean, when I went to Niger, I went with my Nigerian passport because it was an ECOWAS passport and I could get in visa free. With an English passport, and you can't. But usually in any other country in the world, or in most countries in the world, an English passport is going to be much better than a Nigerian passport because of the colonial history, of course. And so with my Nigerian, maybe I can get into 40 or 50 countries visa free. With my English, 170. And that is obviously a privilege I get from being a member of the diaspora who is kind of close to the heart of the colonial metropole, right? In the same way, a lot of us send remittances home because we have access to higher wages here than people do back in Jamaica or back in Zimbabwe or back in Nigeria. And again, that's a privilege we have of being close to the metropole. Some of us are close to the metropole, but we came here age 4 and we never got the proper papers because they said we didn't need them. And so you look at the Windrush scandal, you get kicked out the next day, right? Some of us were born here and have British passports and British citizenship. And the point I was making is that by virtue of having all that, I do have a very clear privileges that are granted by proximity to the same wealth, which I can see has been torn out of Africa. And that was the point, in a way. Saying I'm a beneficiary of empire is saying that I grew up in the UK and I grew up with a UK living standard, and UK living standards are based on, as French living standards are also based on, the continual exploitation of the African continent and other places in the so-called developing world. In terms of the confrontation with Amina and Hassan, well, confrontation isn't the right word. It wasn't really a confrontation. It was more a heart-to-heart of sorts. But it was, yeah, I mean, it was very intense at the time, with a camera on pointing at you, and you're kind of like, "Boof, here's a big ball of eep. How do I respond to that?" But I mean, I think it's good that we included it in the film, and it was a genuine reflective moment. I think the reason I didn't want the film to be about me and Femi's in-depth. I mean, obviously to some degree it has to be, but I wanted it to be about the people of Niger and how they feel and how they and how they tell their story. And I wanted to myself, in a way, to kind of be a conduit for that, but not to take too much room. And I think sometimes my attempts to be overly professional, overly kind of like a investigative journalist or reporter, rather than I mean, at that point I was probably 24-year-old who is in Africa for the first time, and all this stuff which eventually comes out in the film may have come across as stoicness or coldness, I guess. But I was obviously very deeply moved by everything I was seeing, and that comes out more manifestly later in the film, I think. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So Eunice, wanted to speak to you about your experience of colonialism and your petition to decolonize the Scottish curriculum, and also the campaign for the Black statue for the fourth plinth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that is quite interesting, I suppose, when we think about this topic of colonialism, is, for me, in the 21st century, coming from my generation, is when I think about colonialism, the only other point in time in history that I would reference it to, or I suppose look at it alongside, is something like the Holocaust that occurred in Germany. And you know, this is something that we are taught in schools and that we all know is something which is so despotic and so horrific. And there are many sites where people can go and reflect and pay their, I suppose, homage to their ancestors, etc., etc. However, within the United Kingdom, we really don't have that. And I think one of the most compelling and, I suppose, inconsistent things about being a young British woman is, on the one hand, my culture, my society presents itself in a way as to suggest that we're this democratic, all-encompassing liberal society that genuinely does want to do good and be civilized. But on the other hand, as we mentioned earlier, you're much more likely to hear about stories that happen all the way in the United States of America. And those stories are the ones that we tend to be compelled from. I'd even go as far as to say that there's a new chapter I've written in a book, and it's called Transferred Representations and Interchangeable States. And in that chapter, what I basically prove is that many diaspora are seen through kind of gilded American lens by many people in the West, because in many instances when I'm trying to talk about Black history, I have to go to American history. And American history is totally different to British history or French history or Portuguese history. And I think that is a serious issue, and much of the discussion we've had today, I think, really polarizes and crystallizes that and makes it so clear why these issues are so pertinent. Again, for me, I wanted to lodge the petition to the Scottish Parliament because I knew that I actually originally prepared to launch in the UK as well. And I took a lot of time. I went to the Centre for Social Justice here in Scotland, and I went to Black Cultural Archives in London, and I had contacts in Ireland and Wales. So I contacted all of the most relevant people and councillors and MPs before I prepared my petition. But unfortunately, before I prepared it, somebody else had already submitted similar petitions. And that is one of the most dangerous mistakes that we often make as diaspora here in the UK. Like, we don't take enough time to connect with everyone else around us, even in the UK. And I tend to find, coming from Scotland, that, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be film, it could be policy, that a lot of the time people based in England tend to just do things without necessarily connecting with other parts of the UK where you're going to have more strength, more knowledge, and more understanding. And I think one of the most fascinating things for me, being an Afro-Scot, is kind of looking at the UK as a whole, as opposed to just being Scottish, and actually the history between Scotland and England, and the way that Scotlanders who were, you know, complicit in the slave trade, might I add, in many aspects, after they were colonized, and had many participants. But the reality is they're also trying to discommunicate from England, and their installation of the Scottish Parliament and National Party and the successive prime ministers Alex Salmond, now Nicola Sturgeon, the way that they've had a completely opposite way of dealing with things, particularly neo-colonialists such as Donald Trump, which has been very non-welcoming and very hostile. I do think that it is, we could look at a different topic completely, such as something as simple as, paying to go to university or paying for prescriptions or bedroom tax. There are so many different issues where the Scottish policy is completely different to the English policy. And I found that the Scottish government and Scottish society in general is much more open to embracing concepts such as whether that's reparations. So I felt that because I couldn't proceed in the UK, I wanted to petition the Scottish Parliament because I felt that if I could be successful there, then we could set a precedent, which, as in the case of those other issues, important issues that in the UK, often what happens is people in England will look at those issues and they'll be, well, why is it different in Scotland? Why are they not paying for this? Why are they not doing this? So my kind of strategy was to focus on Scotland and see if I could have success there, while simultaneously connecting with and working with people across the United Kingdom to actually raise funds for certain projects. Because the reality is, in order to make certain things happen, we saw in the case, in a completely different topic with Marcus Rashford when it came to school meals, that often you do need to take the lead in certain areas if you want a genuine commitment from government. So when it came to the plinth, it was really important for me to work with a team to actually raise a lot of those funds ourselves, because then it makes it almost impossible for government to say no or to deny it. But on top of that, I've also started a new charity called the Tnbfc.org, which focuses on funding Afro-Caribbean people, diaspora in the UK, so that they're able to run businesses and offer them relief because of the consequences of COVID-19. So there's a number of different strategies that I am focusing on, just because I think mobilization is really important, and protest is a natural human reaction. However, I do think that the organization is essential, and I would have loved to, I was a bit missing in a lot of the protests, because for me, I just felt like I wish we could have had some kind of manifesto. Okay, these are our list of demands. These are the 10 things that we want. And until we have those 10 things, we're going to continue to protest. And I think a lot of the time with the protests that we do, what happens is someone from the other society, someone who is white, ends up deciding what it is that we're going to get, which isn't necessarily what we mean. So for me, it was just about taking assertive, decisive action.
Excellent. So thanks for that, Eunice. Yeah. So I think there's Stuart. I think Stuart had a question. Unmute yourself, Stuart.
Yes. Hello.
Greetings.
Sorry. Hello, everyone. Thank you, and congrats, Femi, for your very nice and interesting documentary work. And thank you for organizing this whole conversation. So I heard you speaking about asking about France and Paris, and because I'm from Paris, actually, I thought I really should jump in really quick. So you asked, I think, about if people know what's about, I think, the education there on the French colonial time. I think it's still like very low today. There are like some, because history is so large, there's so long history, they have to pick up some few periods, some few stories, and yeah, I think, but still today. So I did like a bachelor in history with La Sorbonne. I finished it a few months ago, and the historians teacher that were my professors in La Sorbonne are trying to work more actually on this colonial period, and try to grasp, to understand what happened there, what's exactly the consequences, what were the discussions that we don't talk much in France. So yeah, it's still a start in France. It's still at a very low level of development, but it's still going on. So yeah, for instance, I followed a class on the French Revolution, but this is a class I could choose among many others in the third year of bachelor, and so not everyone was following it. And this class was very interesting because they tried to understand what was they actually integrated the notion of universalism that was supposed to rise from the French Revolution, with human rights and all that. And they trying to work on all these questions of the question of slavery. And I got really surprised that there was the first abolition of slavery that was voted in 1794 in France before being cancelled, and the last official one was 1848. So yeah, there are a lot of surprise. And but if Femi, you would be interested to show your documentary in Paris, well, I think there's all this. My previous professors, my former professor would be glad to be in contact with you probably. So also, I think the main theme of your documentary is memory. I think from during this whole 1 hour and a half, I think that was something that was more discussed by the populations there. And yes, so this question of memory is very, very large. Like in France, they study more the 20th century. So we study more like the memory actually of the two world wars, of these horrors that we were more like connected to, I guess. Yeah. So that's and what I felt from what said the population is that so they still have this memory that is that for an event that was like more than 120 years ago. That's quite long. And I feel that what they wanted is that this memory would be shared, I think, with the French population and them on what happened there. So I think what's missing is actually this connection. So why probably we don't study less what happened there? It's because people French like me today don't have any idea of what is actually the reality there in sub-Saharan Africa or outside Europe. We know more the European history now. So yeah, I would like to ask you this question. Do you think sometimes I was wondering what was the idea of the documentary? So do you think what would fix the people's point of view and feelings, because it's all memory is all about emotion. It's like an emotional memory. It's very personal. So is it good? Is it better so if this would be the memory of Voulet or any other history, because there are so many like this ones, would be like more shared with the French education, for instance? Do they think that would like appease them in there and move forward actually? Because I feel like that's what blocks them for their future.
Mm-hmm. So one of the teachers in the film is asked by the schoolgirls, has France paid reparations to Niger? And the teacher responds, even if France paid monetary reparations for the life that has been taken and can never repair for I think he gives this list of never paid for for various atrocities. And I agree with him insofar as nothing can fix it. There's no fix for what France has done to Niger, but definitely in terms of moving forward and building a better world, definitely a recognition of what France has done is needed. And then after the recognition needs to come the active change in, I mean, even before we talk about monetary or non-monetary reparations, you can't apologize. I mean, the lion can't apologize for well, the actual quote is, I think the leopard can't start healing until it's out of the lion's jaws, but the lion also can't apologize when its mouth is still full of the leopard's leg, right? So at the end of the day, France needs to remove its jaws from Niger's leg, stop exploiting its uranium, stop exploiting its resources, stop controlling its currency, and take its troops out from how many American and French troops all across West Africa in general for very little reason apart from to protect their own national security interests. So all of these things need to happen before we can even start about then actually repairing for and maybe helping and supporting. Before that, we need to stop the actual current neocolonialism, which obviously is touched on in the film, but there could be plenty of other films just on neocolonialism, and this film is just looking at the historical aspect.
True.
Okay, excellent.
Just to add as well, I think as well, just really briefly, I'm quite interested in what Lee's got to say on this topic. But as I say, as a young woman, I do find it, just as a person, like I'm not an academic at all. I work in fashion, I'm a fashion model. And I do find it shocking when people say things like, oh, that happened 100 years ago. Because the thing is, like, the Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust happened like 80 or 90 years ago, but you would never in your life say to somebody that was Jewish, oh, that happened a long time ago. So I think we as modern Europeans need to understand that we value our history, and we don't think about it as a long time ago when it suits us. We have buildings. I remember there's a building that burned down recently. I don't know if that was in France. And it's just a building, right? It's just a building.
Yeah, Notre Dame, the Notre Dame.
It means something to people, never mind their actual grandparents. And I think that what we need to recognize as modern Europeans, and I consider myself to be part of this society, is there's something inhumane about denying that and about not understanding that that isn't a long time ago, and there are things that we regularly celebrate yearly and commemorate that happened more than hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And I just wanted to say that, but I'm quite interested, if we've got a little bit of time, if Lee's got anything to comment on that, just because of his background.
I agree with you on that, actually. I think, and also that's why I think I chose history, and I chose to, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to study different areas with this degree, because I think history is a way to understand everyone, every population, everyone's personal history, and to really I think connect people together and have a certain empathy between different people, which is quite new today, because it's the colonialism just ended very few decades ago, but still on today. So I think history is a way to make a better friendship, I would say. So
okay, thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I had one more person. It was Alexandra.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. First, I just wanted to say thank you to Femi for a brilliant film. I have to say, it was very well executed, and also thank you to the panel for your thoughts and your meditations. I just wanted to make like a few just very short points, if I may. The first, I thought it was actually brilliant, as Dr. Jasper said, that you included African spirituality, its impact on the French soldiers, but more to the point how it galvanized a sense of resistance to the Niger people. And appreciated the engagement with African spirituality, animism, without the white gaze, and you were able to engage with it on its own terms. I felt that was like pivotal. So I really appreciated that. I also thought that your choice to look at Niger in particular and focus on Villers as almost like a case study, I thought that was a really good idea because it made our conversation about colonialism tangible. Usually it's quite abstract, but you made it more real by engaging with human beings. So I thought that was quite a brilliant move. With regards to I don't want to say criticisms, but I guess it's what it is. It would have been nice for you to include your departure from Niger and your final words with your guide, and sort of maybe their final words with you, just almost like a goodbye almost. It would have been nice to sort of view you as a grandchild of Africa, paying homage to the children of Africa, because they experienced colonialism on a much more intense and palpable level than we in the West do. So I thought that would have been nice to include. I also thought that the violence against women could have been spoken about a bit more, because violence is always gendered. And when the women's experience was spoken about, it was typically in the context of, I say like it's nothing, but like being slaughtered and being kidnapped. But during colonialism, rape and ethnic cleansing was very much typical. I felt more could have been said about that, and how sort of the politicization of the woman's body with regard to that could have been played on a bit more. And I also just wanted to ask Femi, the gentleman who was guarding Villers' grave, who hired him? Because when asked, what does it say on his grave? He said, I don't know, I'm illiterate. So who hired him to do that? And I guess, how was he treated by the locals doing that?
Firstly, just to check, is this Alex Brown that I met a few years ago with dreadlocks?
Oh, you remember me? I didn't think you'd remember me.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, we met at a party, right? Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
We had a long conversation that night.
Yeah, we did.
Cool. But indeed, the question, I think that for sure, I think part of the reason that we didn't go into the rape element is because of the fact that Nigeria is a very, very religious, very, very Muslim country, and
Right.
all of our stuff was first-hand testimony, and a lot of the time as well, you'll notice that we went out of our way to speak to the schoolgirls. We have Amina, who's a strong lead, but because of just the way Niger is, if you go to a village and you ask to speak to the elders, a lot of the time, the people who will be presented as the elders that the authorities might be the men, and Nigerian men, as far as I'm aware. I mean, they would talk of kidnapping and they would talk of this, but they would be talking in code, because it's something about their honor to not necessarily go into the details. And so in terms of our first-hand testimony, we didn't really have many first-hand testimony talking about. And I as a guide, and I think even Amina and Hassan would have been uncomfortable in that setting to be like, oh, can you help me translate this, and let's ask a very specific question about that in that context. And because of that, I could have, I guess, done it in the voiceover, but I think the most powerful moments in the film are all, and of course it's alluded to when you hear this, the woman the woman with the who's been kidnapped, and you're hearing her diary and this, that, the rest, and you hear about what happened. It's all kind of there under the surface, but it's not explicitly said. And had it been more open and we've been able to get that from the first-hand testimony, I completely agree that it should have been included, or even that it could have been delved on more. And again, I think as well, the other thing that, in terms of the actual ongoing stuff in Niger about gender stuff, I think that it had to be a film about European colonialism, and that there was always the danger if we went into, I mean, there's the scene where someone offers me their daughter in marriage, and I don't know whether it's a joke or not, but I think if we had gone down the route of kind of child marriage and polygamy and this, that, the rest, it could easily have become a film that Europeans could have interpreted as, oh, look how barbarous Africa is, rather than look how barbarous Europe is. But I definitely think you're right. I also think you're right in terms of it would have been nicer to have a resolution in Niger. I think that it was a choice because, I mean, we had some stuff we always wanted to finish on the big solar thing, but we could have had a firmer kind of resolution of me and the guides. The reason we chose to go back and tie it in those, because obviously it's 1.5 hours and we had to do 1.5 hours because that's the time slot we were given by the BBC, because they have very rigid scheduling, whereas the BFI we might have been able to go a bit over. It's always the things that are left on the cutting table. And yeah, I think we chose to use the coming back to Oxford just because, one, it was like, oh, well, the film isn't quite finished yet, and these huge global protests have just risen up where people are actually taking down busts of Leopold, and I was actually involved in the roads protests, and the rest of them are like, okay, well, this actually does tie it back to the current moment, which obviously is good for the story and also good for the film and being able to promote the film and make sure as many people as possible watch it. And it's just, I mean, the story of Saraunia, the warrior queen, which Charmaine has already talked about. We went to visit one of Saraunia's descendants, the current Saraunia, and spoke to her, but it didn't make the final cut because the scene didn't work as well as some of the other scenes, and we just had to squeeze a lot into 1.5 hours. And in retrospect, there are always things I wish we'd elaborated on more. Maybe even if it wasn't the best of scenes, we should have alluded to it in the voiceover, because as Jasper said, Lee Jasper said, it is very important to talk about the resistance, especially when that resistance is led by a strong woman like Saraunia. And of course, in retrospect, there are other things that I would have included, and maybe there's stuff that can be included in a DVD extended version, or even stuff I can talk about on my own social media and the rest afterwards. But I agree with your points, and I think that the mark of a good film is what is left on the cutting table, and
Yeah, very much so.
I would have loved to have included a lot of stuff that I didn't, basically.
No, I get that. No, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to wrap up this session today. So I know a few people have been asking about follow-ups and how to get in contact with the panel members. So everybody, to this moment in time, if everybody can just say a minute, the final thoughts, what you would want people to go away from the film, and then share your contact details as well if you want to share your contact details, and then we'll bring the session to end. So let's go to Eunice, or let's do Lee Jasper, because you're unmuted. So let's give you.
Yeah, I think it's a great film. Everybody should see it. Mm-hmm. You need to read the history and the context of France in Africa in order to relate. Frantz Fanon is a great backdrop to understanding the psychological impacts and legacies of colonialism and white supremacy and racism on the contemporary African consciousness. There's a link between the struggle to individuate the African agency in the freedom from slavery, the failure from Europeans to learn from that, the rise of fascism in Europe, the Nazi Holocaust that follows, and all the way up to Donald Trump, and even Brexit can be a sort of contextualized in the infection of British exceptionalism that allows a people to obscure the objective facts, deny their history, and therefore, as Eunice said, fail to take heed of Garvey's instruction that a people need to understand its history. If you want to get hold of Lee Jasper, then I'm the most Googled person on the planet besides Charmaine. So you can just Google Lee Jasper. You'll find me on Facebook. You find me on Instagram. Not Twitter, because they banned me for calling Donald Trump a white fascist. What do you do? But you can find me on absolutely everything else. So yeah, that's me.
Excellent. And then Eunice?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for me kind of to take away is really just, I think mostly just taking the opportunity to study and learn and understand as much as possible, and to look at it from a social justice perspective, and to cross-reference it with how we are in the West, and make sure that when we're looking at this history that we are just and that we are right if we want to define ourselves as righteous. So it is imperative that we do the right thing. It's also incumbent upon us as the diaspora and those who are conscious and who understand the issues to do as much as we can to ensure that we connect the dots, to ensure that we can do as much as we can to make sure, as Charmaine was saying and Lee was saying and Femi was saying, that we, I think it was reference to Dr. Solomon, that we communicate and ensure that this history translates and is indeed taught not only in the West but across the African continent. You can get me online. I'm on Instagram quite a lot, so that's at Eunice Olumide, so that's EUNICE OLUMIDE, and also on Twitter at how2fashion, so how2fashion, or you can also email me, and that's just info@euniceolumide.com. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you for that, Eunice. So then, Femi, you want to tell people how to get in contact with you and support the work that you're doing as well? If you've got any other future projects that you're working on, please share.
For sure. So I'll put my email address in the chat. I will also put my personal website in the chat, and then I'll put the film website in the chat. My personal website has a lot of stuff that isn't also other stuff as well that isn't necessarily. My camera might be off because I'm in the chat at the moment, but my personal website has other stuff as well, other artsy stuff that isn't African Apocalypse, but it has an interview with Piers Morgan I did about the Rule Britannia debate in which I get schooled on trap music by none other than what's Piers's co-host called again? Susanna or something. One of the most shameful moments of my TV experience, where I forget the word for trap music and Susanna comes in and corrects me. But yeah, there's an interview with Piers on there on Rule Britannia and British colonialism, and a few other bits and bobs. And I'm gonna put the film's website in as well. And yeah, just reach out if you want to, and if you want to talk more, hear anything more, if you had questions you haven't been able to ask today, and hopefully I'll be able to make many more films and bring more stories to light.
Excellent, excellent. So closing words from me, just to say thank you everybody for coming out, and not even coming out because you don't have to leave your house, actually taking the time to actually watch the film today. You don't even have to go to the cinema. You're in your house in your slippers and your comfy pajamas watching this film, taking part in this documentary Q&A. So just thank you everybody for supporting the film. I want you to go out and tell all your friends, family, neighbors, enemies, everybody about this film so that this film can get shared and we have a conversation as well, and we must come together. So if you're interested in history, you're interested in Black Studies, Black History, you can follow myself as the co-founder of Black History Studies. So if you Google Black History Studies, lots of information come on because we're always on social media talking and interacting with people. You can go to our website, blackhistorystudies.com. You can go join our mailing list. We've got amazing works happening. We also work with the New Black Film Collective. I used to be the chair of the New Black Film Collective as well. I have to big up Priscilla for doing the work and getting this film out and inviting me to be part of this film as well. Thank you to everybody that's been in part of doing these screening as well. I have to big up Glasgow Theatre. We've got all the other people that were involved in this screening as well. And like I said, follow us on the social medias. Make sure you get in contact with the panelists and follow them on the social media so we can get this information out there as well. So I want to say a good night to everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Okay, we're all going into tier 4 now, and leaving the EU doesn't mean that we have to stop making links with people. Like I say to people, even though we're officially UK coming out of Europe, doesn't mean that we have to stop making links with people in Europe as well and abroad. Okay, so yeah, just big thank you to everybody for taking part in this screening today, and yeah, have a wonderful evening, have a wonderful weekend, have a wonderful Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, or Kwanzaa, whatever you do it well with your family. Stay safe, and yeah, keep supporting this film and have fun, whatever you do, and stay safe. Okay, So good night to everybody. Have a wonderful evening. And thank you to my fellow panelists. You're just amazing and beautiful. Stay blessed, and I will speak to you all soon. Okay.
Thank you. I'm gonna head off now.
Thank you, Eunice. God bless.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Fantastic job. God bless you,
Good
everyone.
work. This coming in while I'm trying to do this.